What's up, y'all? It's GC Kinsey, here to give a recap of the physical changes I experienced during my first year on testosterone and talk about their positive impact on my life. On the day I took my first dose of testosterone, I made a video about the journey I took to get to that point. Now that I've reached the end of my first year on T, I want to take a look back at how that journey has been progressing, so I will be sharing 2 retrospective videos about that first year. For this video, I'm going to go through each of the physical changes I've had on T, the time frames when they happened, and which ones surprised me the most in a good way. For the second video, I'm going to talk about my experiences navigating the healthcare system after beginning my medical transition, and I will link to that once it's posted. But for now, let's dive in with the physical changes. When you sign informed consent paperwork for testosterone, they give you a list of expected changes, average timeframes for those changes, and which ones are permanent versus reversible. They also give you the caveat that every person is different, so you may not get all of these testosterone-driven changes within the anticipated timeframes or at all. And this is true whether you're going through an endogenous puberty with testosterone produced by your own body, or an exogenous puberty with testosterone you take. Your genetics play a big role in how you respond to hormones, and other factors can affect it as well. For example, you might respond to T differently depending on whether or not you're intersex. Or some of the changes may be affected by certain aspects of your lifestyle, such as diet and exercise. Before I get into my changes, I want to issue a little disclaimer that there are 2 on this list that I'm not comfortable talking about on this channel, and those are genital changes and libido changes. There are lots of other people on T who have provided a wide variety of data points about both of those changes, so the information is out there if you need to find it. But for me, as an asexual person who really values his privacy, I'm just not up for sharing that. There's also one other change on this list that's simply not relevant for me, and that's cessation of menstrual periods. That's because I was on a different medication for cessation of menstrual periods pre-T, and I hadn't had a menstrual cycle for more than 2 years before I started T, so it's impossible to tell whether T had any effect on my cycle or not. Now let's move on to the changes that I am going to talk about, going in order of when they first appeared. Number 1. Sweating and body odor. The first change started around 3 weeks in, and it wasn't on the informed consent paperwork, but I knew to expect it from other people I'd talked to who were on T. And that was an increase in sweating and a difference in the way my sweat and overall body odor smelled. And because I had started T in the summer, this one was extra fun. Honestly though, it wasn't a huge deal. I just got into the habit of reapplying my deodorant as often as I needed to, and scrubbing my armpits with a washcloth when a shower wasn't enough to get me through the whole day. Also, because I was starting second puberty as an older and wiser adult, I learned from the mistakes of my middle school boy classmates who thought they could skip the deodorant and cover their BO with Axe body spray. Before T, I was the kind of person who felt cold all the time, and I hoped that this increase in sweating meant that I would finally feel warmer and stop hating cold weather. But unfortunately, that didn't happen until about 9 to 10 months in. So for most of my first year on T, instead of just being cold all the time, I was cold and wet all the time. I'm still getting used to the slightly warmer body temperature now, but I kind of love it. Does it suck to feel even hotter at anime cons when I'm in a binder and a wig and 6 layers of cosplay fabric? Yes. But is it way better than being cold all the time? Also yes. It's worth noting that if I'm sitting too close to an air vent, even one that's blowing out a warmer temperature like the ones in my house that blow out 75 degrees Fahrenheit, I still get really cold. But on average, I feel warmer and it's great. I will also say this. Thank goodness I'm a swimmer, because I don't have to worry about how much I sweat, or how it smells, or how hot or cold I feel when I work out. The water keeps me nice and comfortable no matter what. Number 2. Skin oiliness and acne. The second change was an increase in oiliness of my skin, particularly on my face, and that showed up within the first month. I was actually pretty stoked about the way this one went, because I had been struggling with facial dryness since my mid-20s, even to the point where it would peel sometimes in the winter. But suddenly, here I was in my mid-30s having skin like I did as a teenager again. The increased oiliness was enough to knock out the dryness and give my skin a nice youthful plumpness and glow. I did get some acne as part of this change, but nothing that I would call unmanageable or painful, more just run-of-the-mill acne that most people get as teenagers going through puberty. And it was mostly concentrated on my face and upper chest. There was also a pattern to it, which was that the acne kicked up when I first started tea, then settled back out after a few weeks, and then that same thing happened again with every dose increase. Oddly enough, the smallest dose increase I had at the 9-month mark kicked up the most acne, go figure. But by now, that's mostly settled back out too. I did become more diligent about skincare with this change. I exfoliate a couple times a week as needed with a gentle scrub, and moisturize with a water-based moisturizer, which has helped me manage my acne and generally works great for my new skin type. I've also had to change my hair care routine a bit because oilier skin means an oilier scalp. And I noticed that around 10 months on tea, my curly, wavy hair type, which previously only needed to be washed about once every 10 to 12 days, suddenly needed to be washed every 5 to 6 because my oilier scalp was making my hair get greasy faster. Number 3. Mental and emotional changes. The third change is actually my favorite change I've had so far, and it was a complete surprise. Mental and emotional changes were not on the informed consent paperwork, and even though I'd heard that could happen, I'd always dismissed it as either placebo effect or just too good to be true, but I have never been happier to be proven wrong. Around 2 months in, I started to experience a notable improvement in my overall mental health and emotional well-being. I'd heard other trans people talk about experiencing a sense of mental clarity they'd never felt before once they were finally running on the correct dominant sex hormone, but I didn't think hormones could be that powerful. After all, they don't change who you are as a person, so how can they have such a huge impact on your mind? However, once I could finally feel the contrast between being estrogen dominant and being testosterone dominant, I was like, oh. That's what's been wrong my whole life. On estrogen, my mood was less stable and more volatile, and in particular, more prone to panic or prolonged negative feelings when I was under stress. On testosterone, I'm calmer and more settled and just way more chill than I ever thought I could be. I've heard some people say that testosterone dulls your emotions and that's where that sense of calm comes from. But that's not how I experience it at all. I still feel my feelings very deeply and intensely, they're just way more stable. Stress doesn't take me on the kind of emotional roller coasters it used to. Of course, I still get stressed or upset when bad things happen, just like anyone else does, but it takes me way less time to calm down from that and get back on an even footing. On the flip side, I've heard people say testosterone makes you angrier or more aggressive. In fact, when I have my checkups with Planned Parenthood and they ask about changes since my last appointment, one of their standard questions is, have you noticed an increase in anger or aggression? But it's completely the opposite for me. In fact, I was way more quick to anger on estrogen because of how my stress levels would skyrocket. I've also heard people say that tea makes it harder to cry. And again, not true for me. I can cry just as easily as I could before. The difference now is that I'm more prone to crying in a cathartic release kind of way rather than shedding angry or upset tears. For example, I used to sit in my car and cry sometimes if my social dysphoria got really, really bad when I was out in public. But that has not happened once since I started tea. However, I cried a lot while watching figure skating last season, or while rewatching The Untamed with my friends. This wonderful new sense of emotional calm and clarity has not only made my life better in general, but has also made it much easier to manage my gender dysphoria. So yeah, favorite change on tea so far, and if I had known it would do this, I would have started tea much, much sooner. Number 4. Deeper voice. The fourth change was what I thought would be my favorite because it was my number 1 reason for starting tea in the first place. And don't get me wrong, it's a very close second to those mental and emotional changes. I get a ton of gender euphoria from this change, which is, of course, a deeper voice. I first started noticing voice changes around 10 weeks in, with very slight subtle differences to the tone of my head notes when I sang. I actually captured this in a recording as soon as I noticed it because for the first time in my life, the sound of my head voice didn't make me dysphoric when I used it. 'Cause I wanna stay. And since those initial voice changes, it's just been a gradual downward slide. I haven't had any of the vocal breaks or drops that a lot of people describe during a testosterone puberty. And honestly, as a singer, I consider that to be a very good thing because it means I haven't had any big scary, oh my god, why can't I sing moments. That said, there have been a few notable voice change highlights. Around 3 to 4 months on T, I started noticing a difference in the tone of my chest voice in addition to my head voice and mixed voice. And I'd already done a lot of work to masculinize my chest voice before T, so hearing it masculinize further on its own was really, really cool. Around the same time, my larynx started to become the tiniest bit visible when I swallowed, and I started having friends tell me that my speaking voice was sounding slightly deeper. Around 5 months, I started hearing the first hints of bass buzz or an increase in vocal weight in my singing voice on recordings. At 6 months, I gained 2 new semitones on the lower end of my vocal range, B-flat 2 and A2. And let me tell you, the way I cried with happiness when I realized that I could finally hit new low notes I had never been able to reach before. So amazing. Around 7 to 8 months, I started noticing some slight change in the breakpoint between my chest voice and my head voice. I haven't lost any notes in my upper range, but I have had to relearn muscle memory around how to switch across registers and when to employ mixed voice, which has been a fun and challenging exercise. Around 9 to 10 months, I started having more friends tell me that my speaking voice was sounding noticeably deeper. And at 11 months, the lower end of my range expanded again, this time all the way down to G2. And yes, I cried with happiness again because that was a note I had been chasing for decades. Even long before I knew I was trans, I had always wished I could sing a G2. I have been incredibly happy with the changes in my voice so far. I know I'm behind the curve of where most people are at a year on T. Most strangers still think I have a pre-T voice, and I still get misgendered a lot over the phone, But the slow pace of my voice change was intentional because I'm a singer. I went on a lower dose of T to give my voice its best shot at changing gradually, and I know it's not done. So I would say I've been extremely lucky with how my voice changes have been going according to plan. Of course, the other side of that coin is that because my voice changes have happened so gradually, I never would have noticed them if I hadn't been tracking them with recordings and sticking to my training. Particularly with my speaking voice, I constantly find myself thinking, why hasn't it changed at all? And then realizing it has when I go back and play older recordings. It's just been so slow that I haven't noticed it, especially since I hear myself talk every day. The changes have been way more dynamic and therefore easier to spot in my singing voice than in my speaking voice, but I think that's just the nature of singing versus speaking. So I have to remind myself of that whenever I get frustrated with how my speaking voice changes seem lacking compared to my singing voice changes. The truth is, they're both changing, and it's awesome. Number 5. Increased muscle mass and strength. The 5th change was muscle gains, and it has been very difficult to track this one in any sort of meaningful way because I just don't have great tools for it. I've never had a baseline for what my body's muscle to fat to bone ratios are, for example, so I don't have any pre-T data on that for comparison. And I don't have a way to measure it on T either. That said, from about 3 months onward, I started noticing improvements in my swim times for both distance swims and drills. An ability to lift and carry heavier objects, a slightly tighter fit around the shoulders and upper arms of some of my shirts and jackets, and a little bit more of a struggle of getting my binder over my shoulders. A slight weight gain without any changes to the measurements of my waist or hips, which means I guess it's probably muscle. Again, I don't have a good way to measure it, but all of my clothes and cosplays still fit the same way, so I'm unbothered by it. And best of all, more energy during workouts and physical activity and less fatigue after. I love working out, especially swimming, and I've always wished my arms were as strong in the pool as my legs, so finally seeing that happen as part of this change has been really fun. It's hard to tell how much of it comes from tea and how much of it comes from other lifestyle changes, like increasing my protein intake and taking some vitamins my doctor recommended to help boost energy. It could be all of those things plus my exercise regimen working together with the tea. One of my goals is to supplement swimming with more targeted upper body workouts, like weightlifting and body weight exercises such as push-ups and tricep dips. I want to increase not just the strength, but also the bulk of my shoulders and upper arms as I continue on my fitness journey on tea. Number 6. Facial and body hair growth and hairline changes. The 6th change was hair. And yes, the informed consent paperwork lists facial and body hair growth separately from hairline changes, but I'm covering them both together because all of my hair changes started happening at the same time, around 4 months on tea. That's when I started getting slightly longer and thicker leg hair, thicker peach fuzz on my face, especially in the sideburn area, the appearance of a tiny dirt stash on my upper lip, and the beginnings of my hairline squaring off at the temples. From that point onward, the hair on my legs and the peach fuzz on my face has continued to grow thicker. I still don't have any pigmentation to the hair on my face other than the dirt stash, but that has grown slightly thicker and darker, and it started to get more visible when wet, like when I would get out of the pool, from around 9 months onward. I also have exactly 2 terminal hairs in my beard area, one on my right cheek and one on the left side of my neck. And I am overjoyed at these humble beginnings of future facial hair. At 8 months, I started growing peach fuzz on my thighs for the very first time in my life, and I got a tiny smattering of terminal hairs on my stomach and chest. I'm shaving that because chest and stomach hair is not my aesthetic, but I still experience a lot of unexpected gender euphoria from the fact that I can grow hair on my torso. One hair change I did not expect was that the hair on my head is thicker and grows more quickly, and I lose less of it on wash days. This is pretty much the opposite of what they tell you to expect on tea. I know many of us are worried about that good old male pattern baldness, but even though my hairline has squared up around the temples, I have had no thinning whatsoever. My stylist actually commented on how much thicker my hair was when I had an appointment around 7 months on tea, and we've had to get more and more creative with layering to keep the style looking masculine. I have no explanation for this, I'm just going to consider myself extremely lucky. I know that male pattern baldness tends to be a later onset change for most people, so of course I'm still keeping a very careful eye on my hair. But I'm hoping that whatever hair genetics I have allow this increase in thickness to persist. The one part of my hair changes that are a constant source of both progress and frustration are my eyebrows. When I was a teenager, I made the mistake of over-tweezing them into very high arches, and I kept that shape all the way into my mid-20s. Then I had drag brows, meaning no tails, for a while in my late 20s. But after age 30, and the further I got into transitioning, the more I realized it would actually be better to have thicker, more masculine brows by default and just cover them up for drag. So I stopped touching them entirely. At this point, I haven't taken a tweezer to them in more than 3 years. They've been trying their best to fill back in, and tea has helped quite a bit with that. I started getting new scragglies and a lot of new blonde baby hairs in the arches from about 4 months onward. And that's been convenient because I can coat those blonde baby hairs with brown mascara to make them match the brown of the rest of my brows, which is a lot easier than trying to draw eyebrow hairs directly onto my skin. However, without mascara, my brows sadly do not look masculine yet at all, which sucks for things like swimming where makeup is useless, or if I just want to run a quick errand and not have to spend half an hour doing my brows first. I'm getting more and more convinced that my brow shape is the #1 reason why I'm still getting misgendered so much in public, and it's really annoying. But my plan is to keep seeing what tea does to help them, and to try minoxidil, aka Rogaine, on them if their new growth stalls out. Number 7. Facial masculinization. The seventh change was also not on the informed consent paperwork, but this was another one I knew to look for from others in the trans community, and that's facial masculinization. I'm too old for T to be doing anything to my bones at this point, but it's still doing something to change the shape of my face, which I started noticing around 7 to 8 months in. The changes have probably been happening longer than that, but they were really subtle, and I couldn't see them until I compared some video footage shot at 7 months on T with videos shot pre-T and went, oh, something's different. Which my friend said was my jawline looking more square. The reason this change makes me so happy is because it lets me know that at some point in the future, I probably won't have to rely on contouring to have a masculine face. Am I still gonna wear makeup because I'm genderqueer and gay as all hell? Yeah, of course. But again, for times like swimming or running those quick errands, it would be great if I could not get misgendered without having to contour my face at all. Alright, that wraps up my personal timeline of changes on T so far, and now I want to go back and compare that with the list from the informed consent paperwork because I did have a few changes that weren't on there. And I haven't had one change that was on there, which is fat redistribution. Though just like with muscle changes, this one is hard to track in any sort of reliable way. I'm mostly going by how my body looks in the mirror, and that's something I try to avoid looking at too often because, you know, dysphoria. I also haven't attempted any weight cycling on T, so that could be why I haven't seen any fat redistribution. Plus, I've heard a lot of people say that fat redistribution tends to be one of the slower changes even on a more standard dose of T, so with me being on a low dose and my changes happening even more slowly and more gradually than usual, this change may have not even started yet. I want to wrap up with some overall thoughts about my physical changes. First of all, I love the fact that they're even happening. One of my greatest fears about T was, what if my body doesn't respond to it? So as soon as I started having my first changes, it was a huge relief just to know things were working. I love the fact that T feels like it's de-aging me. I mentioned in the video I made for my 35th birthday that I feel younger now than I did in my mid-20s, and I absolutely credit testosterone for that. In particular, the skin changes, the increased muscle strength and energy, and the mental calm and clarity are all contributing to that youthful, regenerated feeling. I love that the gradual pace of the changes has made them easy to adjust to. Even though these are all changes I deeply desire, I'm still the type of person who needs a lot of time to get used to new things in my life. So I would probably be freaking out if the changes were happening too fast, but at this pace, I've really been able to just enjoy them. And of course, like I mentioned, this has been especially good for singing purposes. I won't lie and say that sometimes I wish the changes would hurry up a little, because there are aspects to being in this in-between phase that are awkward, and frustrating, and potentially even dangerous. And sometimes I can't help but wonder if I made the right call in taking a transition path that would result in a more drawn-out, prolonged in-between phase. But ultimately, singing is such a huge priority in my life that I know I've done the right thing by putting my voice first, and I'm willing to keep being patient for it. So when the feeling that this in-between phase is never going to end gets me down, I just remind myself that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and that I chose to run the race that way for a very good reason. And finally, I love how I kind of feel like I'm winning the genetic lottery on T. Though that has me constantly wondering, what's the catch? Because I have never been this lucky about anything before. In fact, I've had enough important things in my life go wrong in some way, and I have become so risk-averse as a result of that to my own detriment that it's no wonder I waffled about T for more than 2 years before I finally went for it. And I was fully prepared for that to go wrong too, so the fact that all the changes on T so far have been developing in such an ideal way is almost suspicious to me. But hey, if this is the one big life thing that's finally going to go the way I hoped it would, I'm certainly not going to complain about it. I'm just going to be extremely grateful and happy. With all of that said, now is where I want to turn the conversation over to you. If you've undergone or are currently undergoing a hormonal transition, what has your experience been like? What changes have met your expectations and what changes have surprised you? What advice do you have for anyone considering hormones? And whether you're doing a hormonal transition or not, what questions do you have about all this? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, along with cosplay music videos, makeup tutorials, my 1 year on T voice change tracking project, and other pre and post testosterone voice recordings, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. I hope you enjoyed this little retrospective and learned a lot of new things, and I will see you on the next one.